have to tell you this. How many of here people actually knew Ewing Kaufman? So I'm the only one here. You knew Ewing? Okay, so I'm the only one here that met Ewing Kaufman. Okay, I met Ewing. I used to do a lot of work up in Kansas City. I got to tell you this. My cousin, who I meet up in Kansas City when I go up there years ago, was doing some plumbing work. We were supposed to get together. He's a plumber. And I said, called him, and I said, where am I going to meet you? And he said, well, I'm out at Ewing Kaufman's house. So he directed me out there, and I get out there about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said, get this job done, let's go. And Kaufman lived in a very nice place. So we're back in the bathroom working, and I take off my tie and roll up my sleeves, and I'm helping my cousin get this done, and in walks Mr. Kaufman. And I met him before a few times on some City of Kansas City stuff, but he comes in and says, have you finally got this damn thing fixed? And we did. He went down and got the Crown Royal. He came back. We had a few shots and basically stayed there for another hour or so, mostly telling off-color jokes. And that was the extent of my connection with Ewing Kaufman. But what I'm going to do today...
Use the mic, Tom, because back here with the acoustics in there,
okay, you need this? Can you hear me now? Is this on? Okay, you all are familiar that the fact that St. Louis is a real failure when it comes to an economy. A chronic economic underachiever, and all along the line. Dragging Missouri down, for example, are two abysmal scores. It ranks 49th for both workforce productivity and quality of life. And it says if we're not competitive at training workers and we can't attract them from elsewhere, the state is in trouble. Well, if you look at the St. Louis Promise Zone, which is where a lot of the problems are in the city of St. Louis, what do you see? You see a lack of workers, a lack of skilled workers. You see census tracts that have 30 males per 100 black males, for 100 females, and these are primarily African-American communities. Ferguson has 60 males per 100 females. In short, it has demographics that anybody from the United States Agency for International Development would tell you that dictate you cannot be successful with economic development because you don't have the numbers. You don't have the right demographics. And where is that demographic? It's in prison. So what we are going to do with the Exodus Initiative is to import the skilled labor from the federal prison system back to St. Louis and help and have those folks rebuild the north side, rebuild middle-class economies, and start dealing with the tremendous fear that this community has always had of particularly young black men, which of course translates to institutionalized racism. Now, how do I do this? Like this?
To the way, to the right, to the right.
Okay. St. Louis is doing okay as a static economy, but it's not growing. Okay. And if you look on the St. Louis Regional Chamber's website, what do they tell you? We need 60 to 90,000 skilled workers in the next 5 to 10 years if we're going to have any particular growth at all. And where are they going to come from? How many of you folks want to grow up and be plumbers? How many of you folks are going to be electricians? You live off of that. Civilization depends upon that, but you're not the answer. Okay? We have in the aging, I mean, this is the bottom line. The St. Louis labor pool is shrinking, and it's going to shrink by 62,000 workers. Some of the trade unions are down as many as 20,000 members, not because they don't have the work, it's because they don't have the skilled workers. So what does St. Louis do to address the need for skilled workers? We relocate a federal prison camp to the north side. We turn it into a rapid release facility where we take these young folks, 20 to basically age 50. Yes, I think somebody who's 50 is young, okay, because I'm 70. You take these folks and you take them, the skills that they have acquired and used at the federal prison camps, you bring them to St. Louis, you turn it into a rapid release facility, you base release to home confinement on what they have achieved, not some judge's arbitrary sentence because Congress said you have maximum minimums you have to satisfy. Now I'm talking about a bunch of different things that are all interrelated, most of which I think you folks know very little about, but I can't, so in the time frame I've got, I'm not going to be able to explain everything, okay? So that's the PZ that we're going to be dealing with. A nice quote from the Ferguson Commission report, because what Exodus does is addresses every issue in the Ferguson Commission report and faces it very frontally, and faces it frontally with the fact that this community, as many communities in this country have done, through the war, through the so-called war on drugs, have persisted over the last 40 years in the persecution of poor African American communities. Why? Because it was easy. Did any of you all attend the lecture the other night by Van Jones of CNN? Was anybody there at WashU talking about social justice? Well, here's this guy saying that when he left Tennessee, he goes to Washington, or went to Yale, and he went into that law school, and he said, and he called home to his mama, and he said, "Mom, they're smoking marijuana up here. They're doing all these things up here that I was taught you should never do." Now, if you've ever been to New Haven, you know that the Yale campus is just a few blocks away from the hood, right? Well, what did he see? He saw the fact that all of those privileged kids at Yale, mostly nearly all white, they never went to jail. But 3 blocks away, what happened? The black kids who used drugs a lot less frequently, they went to jail all the time. So when I give these lectures, when I have more time, I tell people the prisons are full of young men and ladies who are primarily in prison because of the crime of not being born in Clayton. Okay? So in short, we are the St. Louis Mosaic Project, except we're getting our immigrants from a country called prison. So, any questions? By the way, that is the guy right there that made all of this possible, Chief U.S. Probation Officer Doug Burris. Here in St. Louis, we have the most successful prison reentry program in the country. The U.S. Probation Office here in St. Louis has less than a 12% recidivism rate. Over 95% of their thousands of people on supervised release are employed. Okay, questions?
All right. Questions, Tom? Yeah.
A question for you. Once the inmates are released, where are they getting their job training?
Excuse me, I didn't hear that.
Where are the inmates getting their job training?
Well, they've already got their job training.
Ready to work from prison?
Yeah, the ones we are bringing to town will have already had their job training in prison. The federal prison system, which very few people know, in the FCIs and the FPCs, Federal Correctional Institutes and the federal prison camps, have wonderful Department of Labor certified training programs of the same quality or better than the unions are doing around here. So and then if you're in a federal prison camp, you actually go out and work every day in your community doing your plumbing, electricity, or whatever. And this is particularly so if you're in a federal prison camp on a military base, as I was. I spent 25 months in the federal prison camp on Eglin Air Force Base back from 98 to 2000. And I watched all of those programs happen, and they did a marvelous job for the military. And the Air Force, the Army Rangers valued very much the people they had to help come, build, repair, and keep their facilities up to speed.
So, last question. Is there any program set up for continued education, just to keep their skills on par once they get out of prison?
Well, sure. I mean, what we will be doing in St. Louis is working with Jeff Abusi and his group and Barry Mocan and various other community partners to continue that process. We've talked with Rankin. We've already got a commitment from Lindenwood University. St. Louis University is coming along. So we're at a lot of places where we're going to get these folks in. And what we're going to do is make this a community facility very similar to the German model on how most of the civilized world actually does community-type prisons. And so we continue that education, and every program that we have inside the prison is also going to be available to everybody in the community. This is going to be located up in the old federal buildings up on Goodfellow near I-70. And the first thing that we're going to be doing is rehabbing a neighborhood very near there with several blocks of four-family flats as a demonstration project. And how we're going to do things differently is we're going to announce to all the world in St. Louis is, yes, there's a bunch of ex-cons up here, and they're building this community, and they're the best damn plumbers and electricians and bricklayers that you have, and if you want them, come up and offer them jobs. Okay? So this is not going to be one of these little quiet deals where the ex-con comes back and is so ashamed of his past that he just sort of sidles into society and hopes that no one ever asks him the question. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, and I'm excited about this. I'm familiar with 100 Black Men as an organization. I know Greg Christoffel, been in several meetings. I've heard of Gene McNary, so you've got a lot of good organizations and folks behind it, it looks like.
Yes.
And I did not know we had such a good rate of, ex-cons going back on the market. I know several ex-cons that are very moral men. I think this is a great idea. My question is, how are you guys putting the money together? If you talked about that, I missed that, to be able to finance this, because as I looked on the site, that I downloaded the new app, it works great, thank you. I looked on the site and it says that you're going to invest $2.5 billion in the St. Louis economy over the next 10 years. So where does that $2.5 billion come from?
Well, last week, the assistant chief of the U.S. Probation Office, Scott Anders, and I went up to Washington, D.C., and we sat down for several hours with the top officials at the United States Bureau of Prisons. And what we were talking about is how do we work to do a ramp-up, a startup, in the context of the existing laws that govern the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, and how they do their RRCs, their residential release centers, and halfway houses as we get a foothold. Because to do what we want to do, we're going to have some changes in federal law down the line. But the primary money is going to come from the Bureau of Prisons at a reimbursement rate of roughly $32,000 per inmate per year. So what we are going to do differently, however, than most halfway houses, we are going to utilize probably a third of that amount of money, and we're going to utilize that strictly for housekeeping, okay, for hospitality and security services. Everything else in Exodus is going to be done by Halbert Sullivan's Father Support, our Jeff Abusi's union stuff, our Miss Elamine's MOCAN. What we're going to do is, unlike every other federal RRC, is we're going to spend our money with existing community service providers who were already successful at what they do, okay? So the money part of this is probably the easiest. If you guys vote to give us $25,000, we will probably use that to put in a fund at U.S. Probation, and then use that to pay inmate salaries for special projects in the community. In terms of startup equity, after I leave here, I'm going up to meet with Alderman Jeffrey Boyd in the 22nd Ward, and we're going to start talking about setting out the process to get community investment. And by community investment, what I mean are the people who live in the communities, putting money into an L3C corporation, a limited profit, sort of a combination not-for-profit type of entity, okay? Because we want that buy-in. We don't want the rich white folks who put all kinds of philanthropic dollars into the community based on their rules, not necessarily what the community needs, but their rules, and say, if you dance to our tune, we'll give you this money. What we are starting is from the neighborhood up and saying, here's what we need to do. If you've got some money that you can throw our way, here's why we're going to use it. But by God, we know what to do. You don't. We're not here to gratify making you feel good, Mr. Rich Person who is giving us money. We want to do what the community needs.
Cool. And other questions?
Yeah, so this is actually a follow-up to what we were just talking about. What kinds of conversations have happened at the community level thus far in the planning stages?
I've spent the last year and a half, my team and others, and what we call it in the old days, maybe you all still call it, is we call it the kiss the ring process in St. Louis. St. Louis has so many rings to kiss because you've got so many governments, so many non-governmental agencies that governments foist off their power. We've been going from the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership to the St. Louis Regional Chamber, to this group, to that person, to the mayor's office, to the alderman's office, to this city, to that city. We've talked with everybody. Ferguson commissioners, the Ferguson Commission. And what we have found is this: there is no plan anywhere in St. Louis that would do economic development by, for, and with the people of the north side. You folks are in the gentrification corridor. The NGA, the Neo-Spatial Governmental, the old mapping agency as we used to know it, between the mapping agency and out to Washington U, that's going to be populated by a bunch of folks who are going to look like you, and all the folks who live there now are going to get kicked out of their places and booted somewhere else. Well, it's those people who are getting kicked out and booted out that we're concerned with, and that we can bring their children home. We can bring their fathers home, their brothers home, their mothers home, their sisters home, and what we can do is we can create a middle-class economy on the north side, and the only time you get equality in this country is if I've got as much money as you do. And let's not kid ourselves about anything else.
I have another question. Part of the problem within the community that results in a problem in the prisons is that a significant number of individuals in prison are suffering from mental health issues or addiction issues. How are you partnering with the behavioral health network or whatever in terms of also with your skills?
Well, first of all, let me tell you this. It is I see folks from Danny Ludemann's Concordance Academy go out and scare all you folks to death and say it's a 70% recidivism rate, and by gosh, we're going to save you from all of these horrible ex-cons and so forth that are out there. Let me tell you that people who are primarily coming from federal prison camps and from the training programs and the FCIs don't have those problems. Not everybody that goes to prison is horrible and damaged and so forth. I'm an ex-con, okay? I spent 25 months working with 400 annoying young black guys and 400 annoying young Latinos, and most of them constantly tried to tell me that rap music was really music, okay? But what I saw with those guys is that they went out, for example, at the Army Ranger Camp, on the Eglin Air Force Base, there was a ramp up back in roughly 1999 and a change in mission. They had more training. Those guys from the camp marshaled up, went out and built, I think it was like 3 or 4 dormitories, first-class buildings in the space of about 5 weeks, okay? There were no drug problems on the federal prison camp. There were the mental health issues, if there were any. It was mostly about how they were going to rebuild their family after they got out.
So I spent the last 2 years studying public health at St. Louis University, and I know for a fact that a large number of instituted individuals in corrections facilities do have mental health issues, and they actually develop more over the course of their time in those facilities. Another problem being they don't get access to the right screening services in prison to screen for mental health issues, so maybe they're not capturing the problems that exist. So I think that was a very relevant question.
Well, let me
question I
interrupt
have-
you right here. You say you know for a fact.
Yeah,
What-
you can
what
look at
you
the
know
CDC
for a
data
fact,
and
for
figure it
example,
out.
is we've got 31,000 prisoners in the state prison system, and you've got a lot of problems there. The state prison in this state sucks.
I would love to look at the numbers that you're talking about instead of you just saying that it sucks.
Bill.
I have one more question.
I'm from Missouri, and you're from Missouri, and I will show you.
Happy to look at it. Another question I have, you partner with a lot of organizations and a lot of state and city governments for this project, but have you talked to the communities themselves? Have you done a feasibility study? And have you talked to the people in North St. Louis that will actually be experiencing this development?
Yes.
Who?
Well, let me see. Jeffrey Boyd and the people in his community. Sandra Keeley, Old Eddie Washington, and the Northside Preservation folks. Been up to Better Family Life. I have met more folks in restaurants up on the north side that are affiliated with no organizations. I go up to the Sunshine Inn or the Sun Inn up a little bit north of Crown Candy Kitchen and meet on a regular basis with all the ex-cons up there and people who come into that particular cafe. We've been all over the north side. What the same thing that you get all the time is simply this. Understand that probably every family in the north side has somebody they know who's in prison, okay? And very often someone in their own family is in prison or has been in prison. So this is something with which African Americans in St. Louis are very familiar with. This is not new ground. When I go to a nice white liberal organization often and give a talk, they're a little bit shocked that here is an ex-con who is not coming out and sort of wheedling to get their approval, that I tend to be confrontational. I go up into the north side and introduce myself as an ex-con, and I have instant credibility. There's a huge disconnect, and young man, there is a huge disconnect in this community from the universities and what's really going on in real life.
Good stuff. If you're inferring that I don't know what's going on in the communities, I would challenge you on that. I spent last summer in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, one of the poorest countries in the entire world, with populations that have...
Which country?
The Democratic Republic of the Congo in Africa.
Oh, I have no doubt of your empathy.
Okay. And I have a lot of friends all over St. Louis, so...
But we cultural anthropologists have a saying, it's called, heaven save us from people with good intentions. So you always have to be careful
You're one of those people
about
with
what
good
you think
intentions,
you're
sir.
about what you think you're doing.
Good stuff, man. That's enough. Okay. I haven't talked to you yet with Ferguson 1000. We haven't talked yet.